Okay, you should be seeing now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I put a lot of thought about how to focus this presentation, because when it comes to pitching, usually it's not just about creating some slides, but rather it involves a lot of game design itself, because you need to create a game idea. It involves developing the slides for the presentation, and it also involves conversation with the clients, where you have to present those ideas, defend what you are presenting, and so on. So in this game pitching 101 introduction, I wanted to run through the complete process about developing a pitch. What are the useful strategies that we can use on each of those sections, and have a view of how this process of creating pitch really is for the designers. Okay, I'll activate the presentation view. Okay, and sorry, it's loading. Okay, so the presentation will have three main sections. Okay, one focus on each of those stages that I mentioned about creating pitches. First, I will see concepting, which is creating the idea. Then we'll go to creating the slide themselves, and finally creating participating in the presentation for the pitch with the client. Okay, so first off, concepting. When it comes about trying to create an idea for a game or so, you first have to take a deep look about what is you are going to pitch. And for that, I mean reading through the request for proposal. This is how usually pitches are sent to us. We have a series of specifications that may come into detailed documents, may come into emails, or may come into just a short message or short list. Because when clients are asking us for projects, there are a lot of different ways that this can arrive to us. And the initial point and the most important thing is to understand what the client is expecting you to do. So you need to make sure that you have all the information available that the client sent to you. Make sure that you have what the target audience is going to be, what are the genres that the client is expecting. And there's a lot of stuff that you need to figure out before you start concepting the game, to make sure that you are nailing your proposal with what the client expects to have in the game. And usually the first step, I usually start with studying who the client is, because there are all sorts of clients, and usually one type of pitch or one type of presentation is going to be more useful against some types of clients or others. And by that, I mean there are clients that are used to the gaming industry. They have developed or are in close contact with developing other games, and some other clients are kind of new in the industry. We've worked with this type of clients that, for example, from statistics company and so on. And the way that we're going to pitch to them is going to be slightly different, because the terminology that we're going to use and how we explain the gameplay concepts is going to be slightly different if we're talking to someone who already knows how the process of developing a game is, or someone that is new to this industry. And once we know the client, once we know what are their priorities, how they understand the gaming industry and the gaming scenario, then we're going to take all that information that we can from the request for proposal and try to compile it into what I call the key list, which means trying to write down the core points of your pitch to make sure that whatever you're going to propose complies with all those key points that the client is expecting in the game. And the thing that we want to do here is try to write a really specific list of short items, like, for example, here, like a free-to-play game that should be played in portrait, that should have 3D art into the gameplay, that is focused for casual audience, that should mix action and arcade games. Also, we need to know about the scope of the game, because the game that you're going to design and to propose should be really accurate about what the scope is. Otherwise, it's super hard for the game to finally come into production. And then some other additional information about what the client is expecting to see into the game, more in terms of game feel, or what theme they are expecting into the game. Like, for example, combat helicopters, and they want the player to be able to apply upgrades to those helicopters. And then the next thing, once you know the specifics about these requests, would be to jump into knowing your audience. Okay, so from those key points, one of those would be like defining who the audience of that game is going to be, because the game is going to be really different if it's focused. This may sound obvious, but you need to make your studies about who is going to play that game, whether it's a casual audience, whether it's like a more core audience, whether it's like for young people, for elder people, or whatever. You need to make sure you know who it is focused for, and then study the current industry and the current gaming ecosystem to check out what's working on, what are the latest innovations in those types of games, and make sure that you understand what the player is expecting from that game. Because most often you are going to develop a type of game, a type of genre that you have not worked before sometimes you do, but in any case, you need to study what's the state of the art for that type of games to make sure that what you're going to propose is going to be something that's original, that has some value that no other game has, and you need to be able to compare your game to those other ones and what you're going to be improving from that formula. Now, from that information, you're going to add some extra points into your key list, okay? That will be linked to what you have learned about what the audience is expecting from your type of game. So, for example, in a game that we had this, for example, about combat helicopters and action arcade game, you realize that all the games that have been successful in this type of games are always having like a realistic aesthetic. So you can start thinking about your game is going to be realistic, it's going to be tactics, because these type of players that like helicopters and combat helicopters like tactics over skill-focused gameplay, and that maybe it's most effectively if it's aimed to a Western audience, because maybe Eastern audience likes other type of games or other types of themes into the game. So the core point here above this example is going to be that you need to add those key points from the insights that you get from the audience and from the public that the game is into that game list. So make sure that you understand what the game is going to be. And the next step is that now you take that key list, which is this series of bullet points, okay? And you're going to use that as a filter, okay? The idea here is that for being able to create games, even if it's from scratch or we are improving over existing formulas, you need to be able to iterate quickly over different game ideas. So what we're going to have is here the key list that is going to be used as a filter. On one side, your lab, where you're going to explore different ideas from different games, and on the other side is going to be the outcome of these different ideas passed through the filter of the game. So what this usually looks like is that in your side, you're like exploring all these different crazy concepts. Here is where the brainstorming areas usually happen. You try to mix and match genres. You try to go with any idea that you think could fit into the game. And then you pass it through the filter itself. And usually it comes to one out of these three different outcomes. Maybe it's a great idea that you can already use, maybe it's something that you have to discard, or maybe it's something that some of that is cool but doesn't really fit into everything that the game needs. So you take some of that game into the lab, and you usually repeat this cycle over and over until eventually you are refining more accurate ideas about what the game pitch should have. And maybe at some point you have a game that really fills all those requirements from the key point list, and you feel that, okay, that's a good idea that we could work with. Now, one important thing for this process of being able to iterate quickly through games and also later when even developing the concept forward is visualizations, okay? And what I mean visualizations is, sorry, I skipped one slide. Is like imagining the game on your head, and you're proposing these different mechanics, not just writing them down on paper, but trying to look for references of other games and try to make these mental pictures of how the game is going to look, how the game is going to be running. Is it fast-paced? Is it slow-paced? And make sure that you see the game running, because that's the way that you are most likely be able to figure out how the game is going to feel once a player goes and takes that game in their hands and is going to play. And this also works from a conceptual perspective to help you realize what should those core dynamics be when you are designing the game. And as I said, this works also for the beginning, like brainstorming stages, when you're trying to figure out what the game is going to be about, but also when you are like working forward into the game once you have already an idea that you've picked up and you are developing forward. You need to figure out your game dynamics, which means for every mechanic that you are trying to integrate into the game, try to imagine how it is going to be played out once it's developed in the game. Make sure that you see everything running in a coherent way, and that you're not just adding mechanics because some other game does or because it feels that the game should have that. Try to think about the game itself and try to imagine every mechanic that you're putting in, how it interacts with the other game systems, and how everything adds up. And this also will help you what in game design terms is called solve your game, which means that when you have a game, there's usually like a most viable strategy, like the way that it's most easier for the player to win the game. And that's most often what the players are going to be doing, even if it's not the most fun part of the game. If the players realize like the most successful strategy is one specific, they're going to be doing that on the game. So you want to make sure that you are solving the game with every mechanic that you are adding into that, to make sure that it aligns with the dynamics that you want into the game. If, for example, in a shooter game, you realize that from the mechanics that you have designed, the most viable strategy is just staying into house and not moving around, and you want fast-paced gameplay dynamics, and then you see that the solution to your game is not matching the dynamics that you're expecting, so you need to keep changing stuff in the game design. And bring everything with purpose, as I said, from the bottom up, to make sure that you're not adding mechanics just because they are common or because other games did that. Make sure that everything is done up to the experience that the game aims to deliver. And usually, I started working when doing this in pitches. I started doing this working in different presentations. And what I mean is that having different files, one for concepting the game, trying to figure out how the game is going to be, and another one that's going to be on the final pitch itself. Because otherwise you sometimes try to over-explain things that don't need to be into the final pitch, but you need those to be figured out for you to understand how the game is going to be built. This is an example from what I call the design sketchboard for one of the recent games that we were pitching, which is the car games from Modern Pig. And for example, here, just to put some context, it's a game where you play with vehicles in competitive teams. It's not about racing per se. It involves racing, but it also involves some kind of combat mechanics and so on. So, for example, in this game, what I started was trying to define the roles, okay, figure out what the different players, different types of players will be doing into the game, and then understanding what is the design space that these definitions are giving us, making some tweaks, making sure that each role has some specific and unique traits, and then understanding how this could be implemented into the game using the different systems that need to be in place, okay? Understanding what will be the skills, what will be the different capabilities of those vehicles, and then finally jumping into what I call use cases, which will be trying to recreate scenarios of the game with that setup, with that set of mechanics, that set of characters or whatever, and try to figure out how a game in that scenario would play out, and see if the dynamics that emerge from that scenario are the ones that you want the game to transmit, okay? So next, this is about creating the concept of the game, the tips how you develop the concept that you want into the pitch. And then we're going to see a bit about the slides, okay? The slides means creating the graphics support that you're going to be using for the pitch presentation. And it's different from what I call presentation, which is when you actually talk with the clients about the game, showing those slides and so on. First off is identifying the consumption format, which means not always your pitch is going to be presented in front of an audience. Sometimes the pitch is something that you develop the slides, you deliver that to the client, and then they are going to read that on their own, and you won't have a chance to explain everything from the game. More often, you're going to be developing your pitch and presenting your pitch yourself to other clients. This is important because the amount of information that you're going to put into the slides themselves will vary. Okay, if the pitch is going to be delivered just to the client and you won't have the chance to present it, you will usually want to add more information into the slides themselves so that just by reading it, everything can be understood. Else, maybe you want to have like more graphic, use the pitch more as a graphic support rather than putting all the information in there. Here, however, we must be careful because really often the pitch that you are presenting to a client, that client is going to be presenting to someone else. It's going to be using your pitch to present that to their boss, to their stakeholder, or whatever. So even if you don't put the same amount of information as you would do in a non-presentation pitch, you still need to put some extra information so that when that client is going to show that presentation to their stakeholder or their boss or whatever, or they're going to revisit the pitch offline, there still needs to be enough information in the pitch itself so that it can be understood by the audience. About content, okay. One thing that we need to look out is for content balance, and by content balance I mean making sure that we are not adding like text walls, which usually put off clients a lot, having like this huge paragraph of text that there's no time during the presentation to read them, and most often either they are not going to pay attention to the text, so it's not going to be useful at all, or they will want to stop reading that and will stall the pacing of the presentation. And also, you don't want like presentations that are completely graphic, that there's always like a bunch of images and no text, because as I said before, at some point, people will need more information about that pitch when you're not presenting the pitch itself. So an example of how this would look in a more in-between way and more balanced would be having pictures displaying usually gameplay, having pictures displaying some of the specific mechanics that you're mentioning, having text that explains those images and helps understand what is going on those images. Maybe also having some highlights of specific concepts that you want the client to pay attention to. And this translated into specific examples will be having some slides that are more focused on graphic elements that show the gameplay with barely no text at all. Some others maybe need more explanation, having text about explaining how these enemies or these mechanics are going to work out. And you're not always going to have these slides matching the same amount of image and text. Sometimes you need some slides to have more image and very no text, and sometimes you need some slides that are explaining something that's complicated and you need more text. But the main thing here is that you don't have like a complete presentation that it's only about text walls and a presentation that it's only about a bunch of images. These, by the way, these slides here are from one pitch that we did to Nitro Games about a shooter that used mechanics similar to those of Arcade. And this was a pitch that we made to Tencent about an MMO with building and cooperative aspects into it. Okay, next about the content order, or about how you put the content of your game into the pitch. One thing that you need to keep in mind is that you have this really well-constructed idea of how the game is in your head, and you cannot just like dump it carelessly into the client's head, because it's going to hurt and not going to be efficient. Okay, so most often the client will have their own ideas about how the game should look. You will have yours like more developed and more structured because of the work that you've done in concepting the game. But in either case, you still have to think about the client having a blank canvas, and then again, if the client is showing this pitch to someone else, maybe that person doesn't have any idea about the pitch, what the pitch is going about. And you need to be careful and build the content from the bottom up and make sure that they are understanding everything. So you start like painting on that blank canvas, assuming that they don't know anything, and you start building the ideas over there. And the way to do that is first of all, starting with the obvious. Sometimes there's some information that you will consider was obvious because it was stated into the request for proposal, but it never hurts to just restate something, even if then in the presentation you just go quickly over it. But it's useful that we are recapping the core elements that are defining your game, and make sure that everything is built like bit by bit from the bottom up. Make sure, even if it seems kind of obvious that you're doing a shooter game that has multiplayer on it, starting from that on the very beginning of the presentation is going to help everyone that's going to receive that pitch understand what you're doing afterwards and why you are doing that. And then once you are like some steps ahead into developing your pitch, you will want to reread your whole pitch over and over and make sure that it's understandable from the bottom up. As I said, it's super easy to make the mistake of thinking that everything is clearly explained because you already have that clear idea of the game in your head, but you need to assume that not everyone has the same built-in ideas in their head. So you need to reread the thing, trying to put yourself in the place of someone that doesn't know anything about the game, and make sure that when you're doing that, everything still makes sense when you are presenting it. Also, regarding the amount of content and how you present these ideas, I usually also try to think about level of detail when explaining some feature into the game. So if you think of this as a game feature, you can divide it into first off the goals or the game feel or the game experience that that feature wants to achieve. And this here will be the part of the game feature that has like a more technical definition, how it interconnects with other systems, how you put that feature completely defined into a GDD, explaining it will have this amount of weapons, the game will have this amount of characters or everything. And you usually don't want to put all that information in itself on the same pitch, because then the pitch can go really long, can get really complex and technical, and it's hard to keep the attention and everything understandable. So most often you will want to go for mainly for the goals, for the overall aspects, the overall field that your features are going to develop. And then when you are transmitting those, it's easier to get them to be understood on the client. And if then they need some technical or more specific definition of how one game system works or how one game system is going to be connected to another one, then maybe you can like make a further explanation on that when the client is asking or when you are asking them about if they understood that the same way that you were expecting them when presenting it. Okay, so the idea is that don't bump the client with too many details, because otherwise, it's going to get really difficult for someone to, in a short period of time of just one presentation, to get the whole picture of how the game is going to feel when the customer takes that game and plays it. And kind of a practical example of how this level of details would work, and also the amount of content that you're putting into the pitch would be, for example, we are trying to define a crafting system for a game. Okay, if we try to define this completely with all the specific details of how the system would work, like players can craft all sorts of items, they can do that in a workbench, they need these kind of resources, and explaining everything, it's never going to be as effective as putting less content into that, being more straight to the point about how each system is going to be used and how each system is going to be experienced by the player, having also some kind of visual support that defines the main flow and the main loops of how those system works. And this is going to be always much more effective. And then if the client asks for some specific detail about how this works, then you can explain by yourself this extra information that you would see here. Okay. And with this, I also like to think about creating the content and also in the presentation as attacking with emotions and then defending with facts. Okay. When you are presenting a pitch for a game, you're trying to create an impression of how the game will feel, and trying to solve some technical aspects of it, but mainly trying to transmit the idea of how the game is and how it feels when played. Okay, so finally, if you follow those concepts, then it's easier for you to keep a flow between creating hype into the client about the game and also backing it up with solid concepts, between innovation when you are trying to explain an innovative gameplay feature, an innovative mechanic, and also with proven formulas. So when you are trying to present some new game idea or some new mechanic, we will also want to relate that to how other games work, because and also trying to reference other games that made those similar stuff, because that way it's going to be easier for the receptor of the pitch to imagine out in their heads how that is playing out. It's going to be easier for them to do those same visualizations that you are doing when doing the concepting, if you are referencing other things that they can relate to. So finally, about content. Okay, here are the main sections that you usually would like to put into your pitch. Okay, I'll go shortly one by one. This is something that we've seen also before when we were seeing those pitches presentations that we have, the template and so on. But I'm going to go through each one of them just to highlight what is the main purpose of each of those concepts. Okay, so for the game outline is to give an overview, like a quick overview at the beginning of the pitch about what the game is, what it's trying to accomplish, and hint how you are going to face that challenge. Hint what are the main game systems that your game is proposing to accomplish those game experience goals. You usually want to do that in one or short paragraphs. You don't want to put too much content in it. It's just like a first overview and include some images that are transmitting the theme or the experience that the game is going to have. Then you move to the fact sheet. Okay, this will be a breakdown of hard facts, like really specific facts, like for example, what is the game genre, what are the platforms that it's going to be played on, what is the subgenres that they can have on store, and so on, and this type of information. And it's usually just a bullet point list that citates all those elements. Then usually you want to move to references and competitors. Okay, again, this is sometimes it's done later in the pitch, sometimes it's done earlier. I sometimes like to do it early because especially if the game is not really defined by the client from the very beginning, because citing the references is also going to help them understand and visualize how the game is going to play out, because you put an idea that they can already know, that an idea that they already understand, a game that they have seen, and then you explain about what your game is doing in different from those games. So it's easier to connect those than starting from the ground up. And whenever you are citing these references and competitors, you will always want to explain clearly what you're borrowing from them and what you are improving or adding on top of that, so that you're not just copying that game. And this brings me to the unique selling points. Sorry. And in this slide, as I was saying, you want to make sure that you are clearly stating what makes your game unique. Okay, it doesn't have to be a long list. Don't try to put too many elements just for trying to have a really long list that feels that you're that seems that you're creating a super unique game. Okay, usually you want to go like more straight to the point and try to put points there that are really specific and really are really adding something into the presentation and really highlighting what the strong points of your game are. Then you go to the core mechanics. Okay, this is probably the most easy to understand. It's the place where you explain the mechanic of the game, how the game is going to achieve those goals using those mechanics, and try to explain everything that's going on in the game. Usually here you also sometimes add control schemes and things like that. Everything that's related to what the player is going to be doing during the core gameplay, you put that in here. Then about metagame and progression systems. Okay, this is obviously this is optional. There are usually most games have metagames and progression systems, but some other games don't. But usually you're going to need a series of slides talking about what the game is going to be for the player outside the core sessions themselves, what is going to keep them playing the game for longer, and how those systems are going to add up to the experience of playing the core game. And usually then try to tie those two different elements, the core mechanic and the metagame, into one core loop, which is like is a schematic where you have these different points and you connect them with the arrows, explaining how this flow of playing the game, getting rewards, getting improvements or whatever, how everything is linked, so that it's easier to see with just a graphic example. And then usually you move to game economy, where you explain how the resources involved in the game are going to evolve. Usually there's no need to go into much detail about the specific formulas or values that are going to be involved in the game, but rather how this flow is going to be working and how the game economy is going to be supporting the metagame. And you will also want to explain why you're adding each type of currency, what is the purpose, why you have this currency for upgrades or this currency for just purchasing new characters, what is the purpose of each currency, and make sure that everything has a purpose on that. And then finally, you move onto monetization, where you describe what are the monetization strategies for the game, the different areas, how you are going to try to incentivize player conversion and everything that is regarding the monetization of the game. And you describe it here. And usually you start by, as usual with the whole pitch concept, you start by describing the core facts, even if they are obvious, even if you have to say, this is a game that monetizes with in-app purchases for cosmetic items. That's a winning opening line, because then every other system that you explain afterwards already makes sense from here forward. And being said that, the pitch script is nothing is true, everything is permitted. And by that, I mean that there are all sorts of requests for proposals, there are all sorts of clients, and you don't always want to follow this exact same pattern when presenting the idea. Maybe some games have like a really complex core game, so you want to separate the core loops for the core game and a different game loop for the meta game. Maybe sometimes you want to move the game economy forward, upper into the pitch, because that's something that you want to have figured out first when presenting the idea. So use these slides or this structure just as reference of making sure that you are presenting everything the game needs, but there's no need to strictly follow that, because each game is going to have their specific needs. Okay, and finally, make sure when you are creating the slides that they are going to be closely linked to the presentation, again, if there is one, because that's what's going to be, you are going to be using as graphic support when doing that presentation. So you want those slides to be helpful for the game to be understood, but also for you to be explaining everything correctly. Okay, so moving last to this last part, the presentation. Okay, there are a couple of things that you have to keep in mind when doing the presentation. First off is you have to go convinced that you are going with a great proposal. Okay, if you don't transmit that confidence into the client, it's super hard that the client thinks that you are presenting a good game, and therefore that the game moves forward into production. So when you're presenting, you have to be confident. You have to be what I call humble confidence, which means that you're confident in what you're presenting, but you're still open to hear what the client has to say and to iterate on the ideas that you're presenting to make sure that you are invested into creating a good game for the client. And yeah, to sum up, just make sure that you show that you have worked on this and you are really confident about what you're presenting. And then when you are presenting, the pitch, you don't want to have this kind of monologue when you are just going through the presentation, talking through everything, and then waiting just for the final moment to get the feedback of what the client is thinking about the game pitch. Usually want to have a more interactive presentation when you are talking directly to them, making questions to them, so that will help you a lot about adjusting your speech. You will see if you are like maybe explaining too much, some of the stuff that the client has for granted and you are boring. Maybe you're going too fast. Maybe you are not explaining enough some of the aspects. So if you get to talk with the client during the presentation and not only at the end, it's going to be easier for you to keep adjusting how you are presenting to the client. And some ways to do that is sometimes even just ask to the client directly when you are like moving from one section to the next. Okay, what do you think about that? Do you have any questions? I also usually like to open at the beginning of the pitch saying, feel free to interrupt me for any question. But I also usually, between sections, try to ask about questions for the client and so on. And it is super useful because, for one, it encourages proactivity. Okay, as I said, it turns this presentation into a dialogue. You get extra feedback, and also you can make sure that everything was clear so far, so that when you're moving to next steps, you're not missing anything from before. And another good thing about this, is that when the client is asking questions to you, and they're explaining their view on some game system or whatever, you also have time to breathe. You have time to drink water usually, and it helps you keeping the pace of the pitch. And finally, how to answer the questions of the client. Okay, so usually if the question is simple or it's something that you have already think about earlier, then it's easy, just ask it with your knowledge. but sometimes they are asking things that are hard to answer correctly, things that maybe you didn't have thought of before, or maybe there's something that you still are not sure how to figure out. And one cool trick to do here is first off recapitulate what the client has just asked you, to make sure that you understood the question correctly, and it also gives you time to think about how you're going to answer. And then mention the pros of the approach that the client may be asking, and then finally move about not the cons but doubts and risks. And I'm going to show an example, okay, to illustrate this. Let's say that, for example, you're pitching a MOBA game, and the client is asking you, why don't we have two main game modes in the game? And you're thinking about, okay, this has some implication in the game, and you have to think about how to answer that. So you can go like, first off, recapitulating. Okay, so let's say, so you want the multiplayer to have two main game modes and those to be treated as equal. That's recapitulation. Then you go to the pros. For example, you say, yeah, that definitely could add a lot of variety to the gameplay, and make sure that whenever players are playing the game, they still have a fresh experience. And then you move to the doubts and risks, not saying, again, not as cons. Do not say like, this is a bad idea, straightforward, because for one, you may be wrong. And for two, it's always better to approach this like in a softer way. For example, saying, I'm slightly concerned it could divide the player base, or that it could be difficult to balance the game if you have two main game modes in a MOBA game, something like along the lines of that. And finally, also the fact that you are having this dialogue with the client also makes it feel like this is a collaboration. Okay, this is actually a collaboration between you and the client, and the more attached the client feels to the game that you are going to be designing and that you're going to be developing, the more easier is that they buy it and they finally move the game into production. I think maybe the insertion reference is too much here, but what I wanted to transmit is that if you make sure that the client is on the same page and feels like they have their own voice into the game, it's easier for the game to move forward. Okay, and that moves to the one of the latest sections of the presentation. Okay, which is that you want to show the client that you care about the game, that you are providing added value when doing these presentations. Okay, for any kind of client that's going to be developing a game, that means an investment. Okay, this could be, you can think of it as someone like lending them your child. Okay, even if it's an emotional investment because they are like developing the game of their dreams, I have this cool idea and they want to bring it on, of even if it's just an financial investment, okay, because they are making a game and they want to make profit of that. You have to make sure that you match that investment with showing that you are invested into making the game. Okay, so that's why usually when doing these presentations, having the feedback of the client is super useful, and also when you are explaining the systems that you have designed for the game, make sure that you're providing insight, okay? Explaining why you are doing those design choices, why you are designing the game the way it is, making sure that they are understanding what's the thought process behind the game systems. And also, as I was saying before, like using use cases or whatever, narrating how you're expecting players to interact with the game, and make sure that they see that you're not just saying stuff because it's what you've seen in another game. You're not saying, okay, make this game this way because you know how it should be done. Make sure that they understand why you are proposing each of the features that you are proposing. And that will definitely make sure that everything in the pitch is more clear and that the client is more confident on the game that you're proposing to them. And that would be it. Sorry if maybe I took a little bit longer. But if there are any questions or whatever, feel free to ask.